It started on a blisteringly hot afternoon, the kind of day that made every street shimmer in a mirage of wavering heat. Simon was driving home from work, a headache pulsing in his temples. The city around him felt restless, like some big creature ready to break free of its humid shell. Traffic was bumper to bumper, and the radio spat out the same song for the third time in an hour. He tapped his fingers against the steering wheel, restlessly thinking about what awaited him at home. The tension in his chest hadn't eased in days. By the time he reached his street, he realized his heart was hammering, an old symptom he recognized all too well. He parked in front of the small, white-shuttered house he shared with Isabel. He told himself to stay calm. They hadn't fought that morning, but the night before, their conversation had turned sour when she brought up Simone. He walked up the gravel path. Every step reminded him of the countless evenings he'd shuffled up to that same door without dread. Those were the days before he'd told Isabel about Simone. Maybe he'd been naive, or maybe love had blinded him. He remembered that initial wave of relief when she said, "I'm okay with it. I love you no matter what." He had felt an unburdening so complete that tears stung his eyes. Sharing that part of himself had felt like the ultimate trust exercise, one that he believed would strengthen the bond they had. But now, he hardly recognized the way they interacted. Inside, Isabel sat cross-legged on the couch, phone in hand. The living room was dim, the blinds partly closed, letting slivers of sunlight illuminate floating dust particles. Isabel looked up with an expression that wasn't exactly warm. The tension felt as solid as the walls around them. "Hey," she said, her voice lacking its usual lilt. She pushed a lock of honey-blonde hair off her shoulder. Her phone buzzed, and she glanced at it again with mild annoyance, then set it aside. "Rough day?" Simon forced a laugh. "You could say that." He tossed his keys onto the side table. "Traffic was terrible." Isabel's eyes flickered, as though evaluating him. He was almost afraid of what she might say next. Sometimes she would appear friendly for a few minutes, only to drop a snide remark that left him speechless. He noticed how her eyes seemed to hold a secret, some hidden barbed comment waiting to be unleashed. But for the moment she said nothing hurtful. She let her gaze hover over him for a second longer. "I made pasta," she offered. "It's on the stove if you want some." He nodded, feeling relief that at least for now there wasn't an immediate confrontation. Yet he couldn't stop looking at her body language, the distant set of her shoulders, the uneasy tapping of her foot. Once upon a time, she was the one who'd throw her arms around him when he walked in. She used to beam whenever she saw him. But those days of immediate warmth had passed. He stepped into the kitchen, dished up some pasta, and leaned against the counter, trying to collect himself. The overhead light buzzed faintly. He used to enjoy these mundane details. He used to enjoy cooking with Isabel, or even just watching the way sunlight used to touch her hair in the morning. Sometimes he wondered if things could ever go back to being so simple. From the next room, her voice drifted over. "You know, I was thinking we could hang out with Ashley and Zach tomorrow night." He froze, a forkful of pasta suspended in the air. The last time they saw Ashley and Zach, Isabel had made little hints about Simone, half jokes that Simon scrambled to cover up. She'd almost let it slip by saying, "Simon looks good even in my heels," with a weird little laugh. Ashley and Zach had looked at each other for a beat too long before Ashley changed the subject. It was mortifying, that sense of panic that came from the possibility of them realizing the truth. He hated feeling so exposed. He could almost sense Isabel smirking from the living room. "We could do something nice," she continued. "Or if you like, you could show them your closet." Simon swallowed. That last comment felt like a verbal dagger. He took a slow breath, counted to 3. He told himself he wouldn't be provoked. "You know I'm not comfortable with that," he said calmly. "I was joking," she replied in a tone that suggested otherwise. "Gosh, you're so tense." A flush of anger started in his chest. He recognized how she carefully framed every barb as a joke. If he called her out, she'd say he was overreacting. He controlled his voice carefully. "I'll be up for hanging out," he managed, "as long as it doesn't get weird." There was a pause, and then a sharp laugh from the living room. "Weird? You mean, as long as I don't talk about your wardrobe preferences, right?" He said nothing, only forced down another bite of pasta, focusing on the taste of tomatoes and oregano. The conversation was already going off the rails. By now, the tension in his stomach had become a knot. He regretted bringing it up. He regretted so many things, mostly that she'd twisted the very thing he once saw as a private, comforting pastime into a new way to pick at him. Eventually, he returned to the living room and sank into the chair opposite her. Isabel's phone buzzed, and she answered it quickly, murmuring a brief greeting to whoever was on the line. He caught her rolling her eyes, and his pulse quickened. Was she talking to one of her friends about him again? The cold way she seemed to gossip about him had become a regular source of anxiety. She ended the call, grabbed the remote, and started flipping channels. Without looking up, she said, "I might have told my cousin about Simone. Accidentally. I'm sorry, it just slipped out. She was asking about you and it kind of came up." Simon felt the color drain from his face. "Isabel, I told you. That's personal. I'm not ready for the whole world to know." She turned, tossing her hair over one shoulder, looking a bit offended. "Relax," she drawled. "It's not the whole world. She's family. She won't judge you." He pressed his lips together, trying to contain the sudden wave of panic. "That's not the point. I trusted you to keep this between us." She shrugged. "I didn't mean any harm." Then a slight mocking curl at the edge of her mouth. "Anyway, it might be good for people to know. Maybe it'll teach you to loosen up." With that, she turned the TV volume up, effectively shutting down further conversation. He got up, retreated to the bedroom, and closed the door softly. In the quiet of that room, he could almost breathe again. His reflection in the mirror above the dresser stared back at him, shoulders slumped, tie loosened, hair a mess after a sweltering day. He looked exhausted. But beneath his reflection in the glass, he saw the corner of the closet door. Inside was a small, separate section of clothing. Dresses, skirts, stockings, a wig. That was Simone's corner. He'd separated them years ago, so there was always a sense of stepping into another identity when he opened that closet. It used to be thrilling. It felt like stepping into a safer world, one where he could let go of certain pressures and just be, even if only in private. Now the clothes sat there like a secret that was slowly poisoning his relationship. He sank onto the bed and let out a breath he didn't know he was holding. He pulled his phone from his pocket, opened it to a blank notes page. He typed a single word, "Why?" then deleted it. Then typed, "Are you happy?" Deleted that too. He didn't have the words yet, and he wasn't sure who he was writing them for, himself, Isabel, or maybe Simone. But he kept staring at that blank page, wondering how he'd gotten here. He couldn't sleep well that night. Isabel came to bed much later, and he felt the mattress dip under her weight. She didn't speak to him. In the morning, she was already up by the time he dragged himself to the kitchen. The smell of fresh coffee seemed momentarily soothing, but his heart sank the moment he saw her expression. Arms crossed over her chest, face set in a hard line. "I need a favor," she said without greeting. "Remember my friend from college, Lauren? We're all going to that big fundraiser next month, and I really want you to come." Before he could reply, she added, "But I was thinking, maybe you could come as Simone. It would be interesting." Simon's stomach lurched. "What?" He blinked in confusion. "Is this another joke?" She sipped her coffee and looked at him with an oddly triumphant glint in her eyes. No joke. Lauren was talking about how open-minded she is, and I was just thinking, it would be such a statement if my partner came dressed differently. It'd stir things up in a cool way, I think. Her voice was too casual, like she was discussing new paint colors for the living room. He stared at her. That fundraiser? The one for the Arts Council? That's a big formal event, Isabel. I'm not comfortable doing that in front of your entire circle of friends, not to mention co-workers, neighbors, everyone. She shrugged. But you're always going on about how this is so important to you, aren't you? Isn't this who you really are? Why hide? He clenched his jaw. That wasn't what he'd said at all. He'd simply told her about Simone because he believed in honesty with the person he loved. It was never about forcing the issue in public spaces. You're oversimplifying, he said carefully. Yes, I enjoy dressing up, but it's personal. It's private. Her eyes flashed with annoyance. You act like I'm forcing you to do something. If you're really so proud of Simone, then you shouldn't mind. She took another sip. But if you don't come as Simone, maybe I won't be so keen on covering for you if people start asking me questions about your unique fashion sense. She let that hang in the air. Simon felt a cold wave wash over him. This was no casual request. She was baiting him, threatening him. He swallowed, forcing steadiness into his voice. Why are you doing this? You said you were okay when I first told you. You said it was no big deal. She let out a loud sigh. It was no big deal at first, but then I realized you were keeping this entire aspect of yourself hidden. You were practically living a double life. It's weird. And if it's not weird, prove it. Show the world how comfortable you are. Otherwise, maybe I'll let it slip that you own half my wardrobe. She let out a humorless laugh. The cruelty of her words stung. He had no immediate comeback. She was twisting everything he'd shared with her in confidence, turning it into a weapon. He couldn't figure out how she could switch so seamlessly from the woman who once touched his face gently while he tried on a pair of stockings, softly telling him he looked nice, to this person who used that memory like ammunition. Maybe it had to do with her insecurities, or maybe this was just who she really was all along. Fine, he said after a long silence. I'll think about it. But inside, he already knew he wouldn't do it. He knew he couldn't. She set her coffee mug in the sink with a clink and walked away. You'd better think fast, she called over her shoulder, because tickets are limited and people are talking. He stood there, heart beating like a frightened bird in his chest, wondering how much longer he could stand this. That evening, he paced around the bedroom. He had to be at work early the next day, but he couldn't focus. Isabel was in the living room talking on the phone. He could hear muffled laughter, her tone far more cheerful than it had been with him. In a burst of frustration, he flung open the closet door and stared at Simone's clothes. Usually the sight of that corner brought him a kind of calm. Now, it just reminded him of the leverage Isabel held over him. There was a crimson cocktail dress hanging at the front, the one Isabel had once said highlighted his legs. He remembered the night he'd first worn it for her in the privacy of their home. She'd lit candles, put on some slow music, and invited him to dance in their living room. The memory felt surreal now, as if it belonged to someone else's life. He brushed his hand over the fabric. He had once associated it with tenderness, even romance. Tonight, it felt like a relic from a lost era. He shut the closet door, took a shaky breath, and found himself pulling up the text messages on his phone. He hovered over a group chat with some of his college buddies, people who'd known him for years, but had no idea about Simone. He typed, "Hey, do you guys want to meet up for a drink on Friday?" He needed support, if only in the form of normal conversation. They replied quickly, "Sure, man, let's catch up." He felt a tiny flicker of relief that he wouldn't be alone on Friday night. Maybe he could get a break from the tension at home, even if he couldn't confide in them about everything. From the living room, Isabel's voice rose. "No, he's here. But you know how he is these days." She laughed, a forced, sharp sound. Simon heard her footsteps approach. Feeling cornered, he slipped his phone back into his pocket. She stood at the doorway, phone still in hand. "I'm going to sleep. You staying up?" He nodded, feeling the pang of how detached they were. "Yeah, I'll be in later." She stared at him for a moment, something unreadable flickering across her face. "Fine," she said curtly, then disappeared down the hallway. Simon stared at the empty doorway, a swirl of anger, sadness, and regret roiling inside him. He wondered if there was any way to salvage this relationship, or if it was time to accept the cold truth that this dynamic had become destructive. He considered confronting her, telling her directly, "Stop using Simone against me." But he felt paralyzed. The idea of losing Isabel altogether tightened around his throat like an invisible noose. He still cared about the person he'd once known, and he wanted to believe she was still in there somewhere. He went to the bathroom, splashed water on his face, and examined himself in the mirror. There were dark circles under his eyes. He looked older than his 20-something years, like someone who'd spent too many nights tossing and turning. The tap dripped steadily, a lonely sound in the silent house. For a moment, he considered opening the closet and just dressing as Simone for an hour or two. Perhaps it would help him decompress. But the idea of giving Isabel anything else to hang over his head stopped him in his tracks. Instead, he changed into pajamas, turned off the bathroom light, and climbed into bed next to Isabel. She was already asleep, or pretending to be. He lay there, staring at the ceiling, wondering if this was what his life would be from now on. Friday came quickly. Work was the usual grind, with back-to-back meetings that at least helped distract him from the turmoil at home. By evening, he was ready to meet his friends. They chose a casual place near the center of town, a cozy bar known for decent beer and a killer jukebox. He arrived a bit late, spotting his old friends Mark, Dave, and Jonathan at a round table near the back. It felt surprisingly good to see them. They greeted him with wide grins and shoulder pats. "You've been scarce," Mark exclaimed, raising his beer. "Thought you disappeared off the face of the earth." Simon forced a laugh and sank onto a stool. "Work's been crazy." They chatted about sports, minor gossip, and upcoming travel plans. For a couple of hours, Simon managed to settle into an easy banter that reminded him of who he used to be, someone relaxed, quick-witted, and unburdened by secrets. He almost felt like the tension evaporated. But as soon as Jonathan turned the conversation to relationships, Simon tensed up. "So, you and Isabel still going strong?" Jonathan asked, swirling his beer around in the glass. "You guys have been together for a while now." Simon tried to think of a convincing answer. "Yeah," he said, forcing a smile. "We're making it work." The words rang hollow even to him. Mark nudged him. "So, any big news? Engagement? Moving to a bigger place?" He shook his head quickly. "No, nothing like that." They must have caught the strain in his voice because Dave leaned in, eyebrows raised. "Everything okay, man?" Simon felt a wave of conflicting emotions. He wanted to confide in them, to say, "Actually, things aren't great. Isabel is manipulative and is using private things about me to control me." But he couldn't. The words wouldn't form, and he doubted they'd understand the cross-dressing element. Instead, he downed a gulp of his beer, set the glass down, and forced a casual shrug. "Relationship stuff. You know how it can be." They exchanged glances, concern apparent in their eyes, but none of them pushed the matter further. The evening continued with lighter conversation. but Simon could feel the tension creeping back in. For all their friendliness, he couldn't share the truth with them. By the time he got home, it was nearly midnight. He stepped inside quietly, expecting Isabel to be asleep. But there she was on the couch, phone in hand, the television flickering with some late-night show. The volume was turned low. She looked up at him with a cool stare. "You had fun?" "Yeah, it was nice. Just caught up with the guys." He set his keys down, noticing how she was still wearing her jeans and a fitted sweater. She didn't look like someone who'd been lounging all night. "Great," she replied with a half-smile that didn't reach her eyes. "We need to talk." She patted the couch beside her. The hairs on the back of Simon's neck prickled. He could sense an incoming confrontation. Reluctantly, he joined her. She took a deep breath. "So, about the fundraiser. You haven't given me an answer. Are you coming as Simone or not?" He rubbed his forehead. "Isabel, I told you I'm not comfortable doing that." Her eyes narrowed, flickering with anger. "But you can't just hide it forever. Didn't you say you wanted to express yourself more?" She tilted her head as if mocking some deep statement he'd never quite made. "Besides, I've already told Lauren that you might be wearing something extra special. She's looking forward to it." Simon felt his heart pound. "You told Lauren?" He thought of Lauren's wide social circle, how quickly word would spread. He imagined her telling half a dozen people, each one repeating it until everyone at the fundraiser expected to see him in a dress. Isabel shrugged, feigning innocence. "Yeah, she's my best friend from college. Why shouldn't I tell her? She won't judge. It's all fine." He stared at her, trying to grasp how she could trivialize something that meant so much to him. Something that, in the wrong context, could cost him friendships, job opportunities, or at least lead to massive misunderstandings. But she was speaking as though it was purely a matter of entertaining others. "You're not giving me a choice, are you?" he asked, voice shaking slightly. She turned to him, fixing him with a look that was strangely resolute, almost unfeeling. "Of course you have a choice, but if you choose not to do it, I'm not going to protect your little secret if it slips out at the event." She leaned closer, her voice dropping to a near whisper. "And trust me, it might slip out. I can be clumsy with words when I've had a few drinks." Anger and dread swirled in him. He gripped the edge of the couch. "This is blackmail." She stood abruptly. "Don't be so dramatic. It's an opportunity for you to be true to yourself." She punctuated the last phrase with air quotes that made Simon flinch. Without waiting for his response, she stalked down the hallway to the bedroom, slamming the door behind her. Simon was left on the couch with his thoughts, his pulse pounding in his ears. He realized, in that moment, that he might be looking at the end of their relationship. And the idea that she was pushing him into a public display, only to potentially mock or humiliate him, made his chest tighten with a suffocating sense of betrayal. Days passed in a tense stalemate. Isabel maintained an outward facade of politeness, but every so often she dropped a barbed comment about the upcoming fundraiser. Simon tiptoed around the house, trying to avoid arguments. He thought about seeking help, maybe a counselor or a trusted friend, but he didn't want to risk more exposure. Besides, a part of him was deeply ashamed of how toxic things had become. Admitting it out loud felt like a failure. One evening, as the date of the fundraiser crept closer, he found himself alone at home. Isabel was out running errands. The clock read 7:00 p.m., and sunlight still lingered across the hardwood floors. The house felt oddly peaceful without her presence. He lingered by the closet, hesitating for several long moments before finally opening it. He touched Simone's clothes, feeling the whisper of fabric beneath his fingertips. That old, familiar sense of calm flickered in the corner of his mind. He slid out a soft, charcoal gray wrap dress. The color had always looked understated yet elegant. He held it up against himself, looking at his reflection in the full-length mirror mounted on the closet door. Part of him wanted to slip it on right there. Maybe he could reclaim that sense of ease he used to have before Isabel turned everything into a weapon. He thought about how different everything felt when he was alone and unjudged. Eventually, he carefully replaced the dress on the hanger and closed the closet. He couldn't risk her walking in and seeing him, not with the way she'd been acting lately. It would give her more ammunition. He spent the next hour lost in thought, perched on the edge of the couch, staring at a half-finished glass of water. The sense of dread grew every day. He considered his options: give in to her demand and attend the fundraiser as Simone, or refuse and risk her unveiling everything in the most humiliating way possible. Neither seemed like a path to happiness. Each felt like a trap. He was furious at himself for giving her this kind of power. When Isabel finally came home, the mood shifted back to tension. She walked in with grocery bags, didn't even greet him. He helped her put items away in awkward silence. The hum of the refrigerator, the only sound between them. At one point, she turned to him and said, "You're not really going to back out, right? I've already told everyone you're coming in a nice dress." The words were laced with a dismissive grin. That night, he couldn't hide his frustration any longer. "This is too much, Isabel," he snapped, slamming a cupboard shut. "I never asked for everyone to know. This was supposed to be something I trusted you with." Her eyes snapped. "Don't you dare act like I've ruined your life. You put me in this position by being secretive in the first place. I'm just giving you the chance to own it." His chest tightened with anger. "You're giving me no such chance. You're forcing me into something humiliating, and you know it. Stop acting like you're doing me a favor." She glared at him. "If it's so humiliating, then maybe you shouldn't do it at all. But don't come crying to me when word gets out. I'm done lying for you." He opened his mouth to reply, but couldn't find the words. The conversation was going nowhere, cycling through the same toxic pattern. At last, he threw up his hands in disgust and walked to the bedroom. He locked the door, ignoring her shouts from the hallway. Heart pounding, he sank onto the bed, feeling tears of frustration welling up. He couldn't remember the last time he'd felt so trapped. A week before the fundraiser, Simon came home from work to find an unsettling surprise. A glossy sky blue dress lay draped across the couch, along with a pair of matching heels. Atop them rested a note in Isabel's neat handwriting. "I found these in my size, but I think they'll look great on Simone. Wear them to the event. Make sure you practice walking in the heels so you don't embarrass me in front of everyone." He stared at the note, anger blooming across his face. This was so blatant, so cruelly mocking. She'd made it clear she intended to show him off. He picked up the dress, running the silky material through his fingers. He threw it back onto the couch as if it had burned him, the note fluttering to the floor. He couldn't continue like this. Isabel emerged from the kitchen, a smirk on her face. "Oh, you're home," she said innocently. "Do you like it?" She gestured to the ensemble on the couch. He clenched his jaw. "No," he replied bluntly. "I don't." She rolled her eyes. "Well, you're the one who has to wear it, so get used to it." Then she brushed past him. He felt a surge of desperation. All of his attempts to reason with her had failed. He began to wonder if the only solution was to leave, but that seemed daunting. They'd lived together for almost 2 years. Their finances were intertwined. The idea of packing up his life and finding a new place to live felt overwhelming. Still, the alternative was staying in a space that felt more suffocating by the day. He took a deep breath. "I'm not wearing it," he said, following her into the kitchen. "I'm done with the threats, Isabel." She turned slowly, eyes glinting. "Excuse me?" "You heard me," he said firmly, though his voice trembled slightly. "I'm not wearing it. I'm not going to let you bully me anymore." Her mouth hung open, then set into a tight line. "I'm not bullying you. If you want to be some sort of dress-wearing partner, then you need to show some guts and stop hiding. Otherwise, maybe you're just a coward. Maybe this was all a lie." He shook his head, amazed at the cruelty. "It wasn't a lie," he said. "I told you about Simone because I loved you and trusted you, but you twisted it." His voice cracked with emotion. "I don't deserve this." She stared at him for a moment, her expression unreadable. Then she laughed, a short, harsh sound. "Well, if you think you deserve better, then maybe you should get out of here. But don't expect me to cover for you when people start asking questions." He felt the threat like a hammer blow, but something inside him snapped. "Then let them ask," he shot back, chest heaving. "I'm done letting you blackmail me. If you want to tell people, go ahead." The words left his mouth before he could second-guess them. As soon as they were out, he felt a surge of both fear and liberation. Isabel's face flickered, uncertain for the first time in a while. She must have realized that if he truly stopped caring about her threats, her power over him would vanish. She opened her mouth to speak, but he turned and walked away, heading to the bedroom. He shut the door firmly. His hands shook as he leaned against the wall, trying to steady his breathing. He'd finally stood up to her, but the consequences loomed large in his mind. The final week before the fundraiser passed in cold silence. They avoided each other as much as possible, exchanging only minimal words related to household chores. Each time Simon wondered if she'd follow through on her threat and publicly out him, he felt a surge of dread. But he reminded himself that anything was better than letting her manipulate him further. On the outside, he probably appeared more anxious than ever, but inside, he felt a flicker of resolve, an exhausted determination to regain control of his life. He debated whether he should actually move out. A couple of times, he began to gather his clothes and personal items in a suitcase, but then he'd hesitate. He wasn't financially ready. He also hated the idea of leaving behind the life he'd built. Still, every room in the house felt charged with tension. Even a simple breakfast turned into a quiet affair, with Isabel shooting daggers with her eyes, making no attempt to hide her contempt. When the night of the fundraiser arrived, he hadn't made any move to attend. He'd decided weeks ago that he would not participate in that charade. Isabel, however, dressed to the nines. She wore a sleek black gown, hair swept up in an elegant twist. She barely glanced at him as she walked out the door, but she paused in the hallway to say one last thing. "People are expecting you tonight. If you don't show up as Simone, they'll have questions. Don't think I won't tell them everything." Then she left, letting the door slam behind her. Simon sank onto the couch, breathing shakily. He turned on the TV, the volume low, not really watching it. His eyes kept darting to the clock. 7:00 p.m., 8:00 p.m., 9:00 p.m. Each passing hour felt like a step closer to doom. He imagined her at the fundraiser, swirling a glass of wine, leaning in to whisper secrets to curious acquaintances. He pictured the shock and gossip. Was it better to be there in person, controlling his own narrative, or to stay home and let her talk? He wrestled with the question until nearly 9:30 p.m. At 10:00, his phone chimed. It was a text message from an unknown number. "Hey man, are the rumors true? Isabel just told everyone you like to wear dresses. People are asking a lot of questions. What's going on?" Simon felt his stomach drop as he read it. He recognized the area code. It must have been someone from Isabel's circle. He didn't reply. Another message arrived moments later. "Don't worry if it's real or not. You do you, buddy. No judgment here. But just so you know, Isabel's kind of upset." Simon stared at the screen, his heartbeat pounding in his ears. That was it then. She'd told them. A dozen scenarios whirled through his head. He pictured old acquaintances snickering, co-workers hearing about it, family members calling him. He stood up, paced the living room, phone clutched in his hand like a lifeline, and a curse at the same time. Waves of shame and anger fought for dominance. But within that storm of emotion, he recognized something unexpected. He felt lighter. The worst had happened. She'd shared his secret, and while it stung, it also meant she'd played her last card. He breathed in slowly, exhaled, then he typed a quick reply to the unknown number. "It's true. If anyone asks, just tell them I'm fine and I'm not ashamed." Hitting send felt like another door closing, but maybe one door closing meant another would open. Isabel came home around midnight, the stench of alcohol on her breath. Simon was still awake, sitting at the kitchen table, arms folded. She walked in, looked at him, and let out a sarcastic laugh. "Wow, you didn't even show," she said, her voice slurring slightly. "But don't worry, I handled everything. I told them all about your sweet little Simone." Simon felt a burst of hot anger, but there was also a strange calm in him. "I know," he said quietly. She lifted a brow. "You know?" "Someone texted me," he explained. "Word travels fast." He stood up, meeting her gaze. "So it's done. You told everyone." She shrugged, unsteady on her feet. "Yeah, didn't take much. It actually made me quite popular for the evening. People were really curious." She let out a laugh, but it held no humor. They were all, "Oh, Isabel, you're so progressive," or "I can't believe Simon would do that, that's wild." "So, I guess you got your wish. Your secret's out." Simon stared at her, heart pounding, but something was shifting inside him, a tiny liberation. "I never wanted it out in such a cruel way," he said. "But now that it's done, you have nothing left to threaten me with." She rolled her eyes, wobbling slightly. "You think I care? Maybe I'll just keep telling more people." He nodded slowly. "Do whatever you want, but you can't scare me now." She scoffed, then pushed past him. In a few seconds, he heard the bedroom door slam. He stood in the hallway, listening to his own breath in the quiet. Outside, distant traffic noises drifted through the window. He felt oddly numb and deeply sad, but also a piece of him felt like he'd finally broken free from her grip. The next morning, Isabel was hungover. She stumbled out of the bedroom, hair disheveled, eyes red-rimmed. She muttered a low "morning" and grabbed a glass of water. Simon was already up, sitting at the table, phone in hand. He'd received multiple messages overnight, some from acquaintances, a few from unknown numbers, and even from a couple of mutual friends. The reactions ranged from curiosity to mild shock to cautious support. He hadn't dared open them all yet. Isabel sat across from him, rubbing her temples. "So, what now?" she asked, her tone somewhere between scornful and drained. "Are you going to throw on a pretty skirt and waltz around town?" He looked at her, noticing how tired she seemed. "I'm not sure what I'm going to do," he admitted quietly. "But I do know I'm not staying in this dynamic anymore." She let out a hollow laugh. "Oh, come on. So you're just done with me? That's it?" He studied her face. He thought of the first time he'd met her, how he'd been struck by her vibrancy and warmth. She'd been kind and encouraging in the early days, at least it had seemed so, but now that seemed so distant. "I still care about you," he said slowly. "But this is toxic, Isabel. You hurt me, and I can't live like this anymore." She looked down at the table, silent for a moment. When she spoke again, her voice was quiet, almost vulnerable. "You lied to me first," she said, staring at her hands. "You kept this whole other side of you hidden." He inhaled, remembering the guilt he'd once felt, but now it only felt partially relevant. "Yes, I didn't tell you at the very start. It's not easy to share, but I did eventually open up to you and I trusted you. I never used it against you. You chose to turn it into a weapon." She pressed her lips together, gaze hardening again. "Well, maybe I'm not as accepting as I thought." The words hung in the air like a final indictment. Simon nodded slowly. The truth had been laid bare. He stood up, pushing his chair back. "I'm going to stay at a friend's place for a while," he said. "I'll pack some clothes and figure out the rest later." She said nothing, merely stared at him with an unreadable expression. He went to the bedroom, grabbed a duffel bag, and filled it with essentials. He paused at the closet where Simone's clothes hung. He carefully took a few items, folded them, and placed them in the bag. When he emerged, Isabel was still in the kitchen, tapping her fingers against the countertop in a subdued, anxious rhythm. She didn't ask him to stay. She didn't apologize. She just watched as he picked up his keys from the little table by the front door. He gave her one last look, a mixture of sadness and regret etched on his face, then stepped out into the bright morning sun. It took him some time to adjust to his new reality. He crashed on a friend's couch, though he carefully avoided telling that friend everything. He simply said, "We're having relationship issues." Word had spread among certain circles that Simon was a crossdresser, but the sky hadn't fallen as he once feared. A few people asked him direct questions, some out of genuine curiosity, others out of morbid fascination. He found that the best response was simply, "Yes, I do that sometimes," and let the conversation move on. Surprisingly, the world kept spinning. A week later, he received a series of texts from Isabel. "Where did you put the receipts for the utilities? When are you coming to move your stuff out for good?" And finally, "I told my parents about your hobby. Just thought you should know." He felt that old flush of anger and betrayal, but it came with a new perspective. He didn't have to comply with her manipulations anymore. She could tell whomever she wanted. He refused to be blackmailed. He texted back politely about the utilities, ignoring her barbed remarks. As for moving his things out, he scheduled a day to come by when she would be at work. He spent a quiet afternoon boxing up clothes and personal items. When he got to Simone's section of the closet, he paused. He had a brief flash of memory. Isabel once smiling sweetly, handing him a pair of her heels and laughing as he teetered around in them. For a moment, he wondered if she ever genuinely accepted him. Maybe she had, briefly, before jealousy or resentment twisted her feelings. He sighed and packed Simone's outfits with careful folds. On the small dresser, he saw the blue dress Isabel had recently purchased for him. He hesitated, then left it behind. He wanted no reminders of the manipulative scenario she'd tried to orchestrate. With the boxes loaded into his car, he closed the door on the place he'd called home for 2 years, heart heavy with a swirl of grief and relief. Over the next several weeks, the dust settled. He found a small studio apartment, nothing fancy, but it gave him space to breathe and begin rebuilding his life on his own terms. A few curious acquaintances sought him out. Some offered awkward support, others wanted gossip. He fielded their questions politely, but didn't overshare. One Saturday morning, he woke up in his new apartment, sunlight streaming through the half-drawn blinds. He made coffee and stared at the boxes he still needed to unpack. The day felt open, unstructured, and he felt a rare sense of peace. After finishing his coffee, he decided to start organizing his closet. He unpacked everyday clothes first, then moved on to Simone's items. He hung them side by side with his other outfits, no more hiding them in a separate corner. Standing back, he noticed how the dresses intermingled with the jeans and button-down shirts. It looked oddly harmonious. His phone buzzed. A message from an old friend in the neighborhood. "Hey, I heard about your breakup. Sorry, man. If you need anything, let me know. You want to hang out this weekend?" Simon smiled at the screen, touched by the offer. He realized he did have people who cared about him. Isabel's campaign to weaponize Simone's existence might have rattled his life, but it hadn't destroyed him. He responded with a grateful, "Thanks. Let's grab a coffee later." He spent the rest of the morning quietly sorting through items, deciding what to keep, what to toss. There was a lingering sadness, of course. He was letting go of a shared life with someone he once loved. But each time a wave of regret threatened to swallow him, he reminded himself that he hadn't lost everything. He still had the part of himself that found comfort in a different kind of expression. That part remained intact, no matter who tried to manipulate it. As he folded the last of his clothes, he caught sight of himself in the mirror leaning against the wall, waiting to be hung up. He looked at his reflection, not quite smiling, but no longer devastated. For a moment, he draped one of Simone's scarves around his shoulders. He remembered the swirl of gray, blue, and white patterns, how they complemented so many of his outfits. He watched how it fell across his chest, a soft flutter of fabric that felt comforting. Maybe he would wear it out someday, with the right outfit, in a space where he felt safe. He set the scarf aside and continued his work, the hum of city life drifting through the open window. He didn't know exactly how his social circles might change in the future, or how he would navigate potential judgments or misunderstandings. But he did know one thing: staying in a place where his private comfort was turned against him was no longer an option. That part of the story was done. He straightened up and took a long breath, feeling a subtle new energy in the quiet space. The hush of his studio apartment felt more comforting than any threat of forced public exposure. He had no illusions that everything would be easy, but the fact remained that he had stepped away from someone who used his secret as a weapon. He wasn't proud of the pain that had unfolded, but he was no longer trapped by it. Outside, car engines rumbled and horns blared, a testament to the city's restless pace. Inside, in that small room, there was a kind of stillness, an uneasy calm, but calm nonetheless. He stood there, letting it wash over him. Eventually, he decided to take a break from unpacking. He grabbed his keys and headed out, scarf still folded neatly in a drawer, waiting for the right moment. He would keep moving forward, day by day, and in time, that raw hurt would recede, making room for something more honest, more peaceful. The door closed gently behind him as he stepped out into the sunlight, ready for whatever came next.
Did you like the story? Hit that like button and tell me what you thought in the comments. Do you want to hear more stories? Subscribe and hit the bell. For exclusive content and early access, check out our Patreon. You can find the link in the description, or you can watch any of the videos shown on my right. Thank you for watching and see you in the next video.